Okay, we're on page 268. Right in the middle of the page. This is the beginning of the petitions. Those blessings which we ask Kodesh Baruch Hu for what we need. And we briefly started it on Thursday. It's 268. And the translation here is, well, you graciously endow, it's not a bad translation in English, to man, da'as, and we explained da'as last time to mean experiential knowledge. You teach to enosh, and enosh is different from adam, and can be translated the way they do here as something that's inferior to adam. Bina, which is what they call discernment, it's the ability to categorize and make distinctions, conceptualize, and it's very characteristic of language. Then Chonenu graciously endows, we're asking for what above it says that he gives us, from you, or as they translate, from yourself. And now three things: discernment, experiential knowledge, discernment, and practical wisdom. So we spoke last time about what these different intellectual qualities are. I want to comment now on this idea of from yourself. And I'll explain it to you by pointing out to you two blessings on page 228, where you have a list of blessings of praise and gratitude. And towards the bottom of the page, say third from the bottom, you have a blessing upon seeing an outstanding Torah scholar. And under that, you have upon seeing an outstanding secular scholar. So I think it's interesting in and of itself that you make a blessing on people who have knowledge and understanding, whether it's Torah or it's not Torah. You make a blessing on both of them. Now let's look at the particular difference in the vocabulary. Let's start with the one, second from the bottom, seeing an outstanding secular scholar. Blessed are you, Hashem, my God, King of the universe, who gave from his wisdom to flesh and blood. So the verb is to give. And what is he giving? From his wisdom. And to whom is he giving it? Flesh and blood. Now go up a line. Same introduction. Shecholak, who apportioned, not gave, apportioned from his wisdom to those who fear him, or have awe for him. So the recipient is different and the verb is different. And the way they explain it as follows. If you give someone a gift, you could say to him, listen, that door is to the storehouse, here's the key, take up any package you like. I gave him a gift. Here, that's what you say with respect to a scholar of chemistry or Chinese history or philology or whatever it is. He gave from his wisdom to people, meaning the person wouldn't have it unless the Kodesh Baruch Hu provided him with it, and he gave it to him. Cholak means I have a whole, which is mine, and I take a slice of the whole and give you the whole of what's mine. Not mine now by possession, but mine because it's related to me in some special way. That's the idea of giving a portion. And that he gives only to those who fear him. So Torah scholarship, Torah knowledge, is not on a par with secular knowledge, even though both are praised. I want to tell you about a Maharal here, a very remarkable Maharal. I'm not telling you because he's typical that everybody would agree with him, but he's a very important source, and he is something that can't be simply dismissed. And he says, if you make a blessing on someone who's a master of chemistry, and you describe him as having divine wisdom, that is to say, Wisdom he got from God. It can't be wrong to study chemistry. It can't be. Even for a Jew, it can't be wrong to study chemistry because it's his wisdom. It's God's wisdom. There can't be a prohibition on a Jew to study God's wisdom. And not only can't there be a prohibition, but the Maharal says it's a mitzvah. And it's an important mitzvah. It's a central mitzvah because in Pirkei Avos, the rabbis tell us, Da mashatoshiv lapikoros. You have to know what to answer a heretic. And he says you only know what to answer a heretic by reading what they write. So you know how to answer them in their own terms. He wrote a whole sefer on that subject called Be'er Hagolah. And he quotes in that sefer all sorts of the heretics that he faced in his day, and he answered them one by one. So studying the wisdom of the non-Jewish world, since it's described here as, and he brings a proof from this blessing, it's described as God's wisdom and something which is a positive thing to do. And he says, don't tell me that you shouldn't do it because you're wasting time for studying Torah. If the writers of the Mishnah said that you should know how to do this, then they took that into account. And they're telling you that's important to do. Apportion your time, set priorities, and so forth and so on. Yes, by all means, but not simply to turn your back on it. That's what the Maharal says. So now, over here in this blessing on 268, where he says, grant us graciously from with you, that which is with you, that's a reference to the Torah knowledge. It isn't only that we're asking for, but that's our priority. First and foremost, what we want is that kind of a Torah understanding. And now putting together what I said last time, what I said this time, since there are these four different dimensions of understanding, as I told you last time, the Ashkenazi version has three, and the Sephardi version has a different three, that they differ in one, and I don't know anybody who has four, and I don't know why no one has four, but all four are genuine. If you're calling this Torah knowledge, you have to understand that Torah knowledge is encompassed in all four dimensions. And perhaps the least obvious one is a great deal of Torah knowledge is something that you learn by experiencing it. You understand very well that if you try to describe the sound of a violin in words and the person never heard the instrument played, he would have next to no understanding of what a violin sound is. The same with the taste of strawberries. Certain things are inherently experiential. Now, how about Shabbos? Write a book about Shabbos and convey to the reader what the experience of Shabbos is like. It's not possible. You gain knowledge of Torah by experiencing what it is to live, what the Torah wants you to live. That's part of understanding it. It is a program for living, after all. And you can't understand a program for living unless you know what the living experience is like. And there's an interesting interdependence between, let's say, Chachma Bina, which is a kind of purely intellectual knowledge, and experiential knowledge, that they go hand in hand and each one supports the other. First of all, in many areas of life, it's impossible to learn from experience unless you have some theoretical knowledge and understanding. Imagine, my guess is that none of you knows how to play Go, the Chinese game. So you see two people sitting at a board with lots and lots of holes in it, and each one has a pile of marbles, and they're putting marbles in the board, and they're taking marbles off the board. What will you learn from that experience? Well, it's play with marbles. And the marbles go in the holes. Can you discern a good move from a bad move? Probably not, because you don't know what the goal of the game is, and you don't know what the rules are. You know what the strategies are. Can't learn a lot from looking at the game being played unless you have a background of understanding. Now here's an actual example. This actually happened once. A rabbi was sitting on Friday morning with his students, teaching them, and he was also a decisor for the town. That means to say when there were practical questions, he answered them. And a woman came in, it was Friday morning, and she was carrying a chicken. So obviously he knew right away she wanted to know whether the chicken was kosher or not. There must be some problem with the chicken. So he motioned for her to wait because he was in the middle of a lecture to his students. And he's lecturing, it's going on. And time is passing. Well, she's got to prepare for Shabbos. If the chicken isn't kosher, she then has to go and do something about getting a replacement. And the time's going on and on. It's getting close to the time when the market closes. And she was getting agitated. Finally, he motioned her to come over, he looked at it and said, kosher. Oh, with great relief, she walked out. But the students weren't satisfied. I mean, what would you say? I know, it's men over women. Don't give any attention to women when the men have priority. Maybe, if you're a feminist from San Francisco, you might think that. Well, the students asked him, he said, I'll tell you why. Because when I looked at the chicken, I immediately saw what the problem was. And I know that this problem is controversial. Some say it's kosher, some say it isn't. And I also know that the practical decision is, if it's going to cost too much effort, then you're allowed to be lenient and say that it's kosher. But if it isn't going to cost too much effort, then you have to say that it's treif. So I waited until the market is almost closing for her to exchange it. When the market is closing, it's going to be very, very difficult. And therefore, I could rule leniently and tell her that it was kosher. Without that legal knowledge, you wouldn't understand what you saw. You have no clue as to what it meant. So the learning from the experience of learning from the world depends a lot on your background of abstract information, which can help you to interpret what you learn from the world or what you experience. And as I pointed out before, vice versa, that if you don't have the living experience, so then very, very difficult to understand what's written in the Sforim. So that's why I think it's the plea for Torah knowledge here is to be interpreted as applying in all of the dimensions. Okay, that's all I have to say about this blessing. We're together? Okay, let's go to the next blessing. Return us, our Father, to your Torah. Draw us close, our King, to your service. And another word for return. Return us in complete repentance before you. Let's start with the third, repentance. Well, in English, it's not a good translation for the concept of tshuva. Tshuva is what you do to free yourself from responsibility for past transgressions. And the simple definition of tshuva, there are nuances and variations, but the simple definition is to do tshuva means, number one, to commit yourself not to repeat the transgression, and number two, to regret having done it in the past, and number three, to confess that to God. That's how you rid yourself of your responsibility for your transgressions. What am I doing here? Am I asking God to perform my tshuva? Asking him to cause me to do tshuva? Well, if he causes it, it's not my tshuva. I'm not regretting anything, and I'm not making a resolution. He's just pushing me. How can that relieve me of my responsibility for my transgressions? Surely, tshuva has to be my performance. And to a certain extent, that's true. And there's one word that's written here in the blessing which enables us to answer that question. It doesn't say, bring us back in tshuva. It says, bring us back in complete tshuva. Our picture of action is that all human action is a matter of a partnership. Human being wills, he decides what is to be done, and then divine power gives him the ability to carry it out. Without the divine power, he would be lifeless. He'd just be lifeless. On the other hand, nothing's forcing his decision. Decision is free. So it's a partnership. Of course, I can ask God to complete the process, because without God, I can't complete any process, not even lifting my hand. That's not asking him to do it in place of me. It's not relieving me of the responsibility to do it or the performance of doing it. It's locating it. The performance is making the decision. And as you know from your own practical life, making decisions isn't easy. Sometimes it's a great struggle to make the right decision. And if one makes the right decision, even if forces beyond you prevent you from carrying it out, you feel, at least I made the right decision. I'm on the right track. I'm focused in the right direction. And you give yourself credit for it, which you have a right to do. You have a right to give yourself credit. So that's the idea of the third. Now, there is a big debate in different schools of how to implement Torah, practical strategies of implementing Torah, what the process is of self-improvement. King David gave us a guidepost, written in Tehillim, in Psalms, Sur merav aseh tov, turn away from evil and do good. So there's a school of thought that this is the procedure. You have in yourself negative elements, and of course, you want to be able to do things that are good, which maybe you're not as consistent in doing as you should be. So you have two dimensions of your life you want to improve. Start by ridding yourself with the negative elements. Sur merav, turn away from evil. After that, once you've rid yourself of those broken pieces of your character and your motivation and your habits, then you can turn to do the things that are good, that are necessary. That's one strategy. There's another strategy which others take, and that is, don't start by trying to rid yourself of your negative features. The contrary. Start by doing good. Now, of course, the good will be compromised. A person does what he does with the whole of himself. It's the whole agent that performs the action, and part of him is broken. So the good isn't going to be perfect. It's going to be partial. Still, start with that. Start with a partial good. A partial good gives you the strength to then turn to the negative and reduce and rid yourself of the negative. That's step 2. And step 3 is to do good in a perfect fashion. So you have these two strategies. Now, the first question is, what about King David? King David said, turn away from evil and then do good. Okay, but who says King David is talking about steps 1 and 2 of the process? Maybe King David is talking about steps 2 and 3. And there's a preceding step, 1, where you do the imperfect good. And then what King David is telling you is this. You want to end up by doing good in the perfect fashion, you have to rid yourself of your negative features, because otherwise the negative features will participate in your performance of the good, and the good will be thereby compromised. So King David is describing 2 and 3, not 1 and 2. Okay, that's a brief summary, kind of headlines about the two positions. Now, let's go back to this blessing. Tell me what you see in this blessing. The blessing is called repentance here. The first element is, bring us back, our Father, to your Torah. The second element is, bring us close, our King, to your service. What's that? Isn't that doing good? Isn't that the positive? The third is, bring us back in complete tshuva before you. That's ridding yourself of the negative elements. So according to the order in this verse, the starting point is reattach yourself to the good. Do the good. Yes, it isn't perfect, but it's good. On balance, it's good. That's the way you get started. And I think that this has a root, well, not root's the wrong word, it has an echo, because this is much older, an echo in certain aspects of modern psychology, and that is the necessity of having self-esteem, having a good self-image. I remember when I asked my Rabbi Zatzal whether it's good to have a cheshbon nefesh, analysis of your performance in spiritual matters, which some people do every night, some people do once a week or once a month, and certainly on Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, the days of judgment, and then once a year. Is it good to do that regularly? And he said, yes, it is a good thing to do with one condition. When, let's say, you're reviewing the day, the first thing you do is pick out something you did during the day that's good, that you're happy about, that you're proud of, and think about it. Dwell on it. realize that you are a person with ability and with performance and with good background. And then, having done that, look at the rest of the day, and if there are things that need to be evaluated and corrected, then work on correcting them. Make sure that your positive self-image is foremost when you undergo this self-evaluatory evaluatory process. In not only the Hasidic world, but in some of the Mussar world, the big enemy is despair. And that's one of the vicious strategies of the evil inclination, to say, look at what you've done, and look at all the times you tried and you failed. You're lost, forget about it. Or, these things you're trying to accomplish are so great, they're only for a very tiny proportion of the population, for the very, very great few. It's not for you because you can't be realistic about yourself. You don't have an inflated ego. Realize that you have only limited resources and continue to do the transgression, which is what he wants. That's the outcome that he wants. He'll do anything to convince you that that's where you have to be. So you want to avoid that at all costs. Yeah.
I think it was the Chavetz Chaim who has a prayer before Rosh Hashanah or maybe it's Yom Kippur that says that you should do teshuva 3 times a day. Now, I don't know if that is referring to this, what we do here, or it's our own teshuva, like a vidoy on our own 3 times a day.
I never heard it. I have no idea.
There's some tefillah we say.
We do say this 3 times a day. So.
No, but there's like a tefillah that we say before either Yom Kippur or Rosh Hashanah that says that this is how you should do teshuva during the regular year, every day, 3 times a day.
So, and he said to do it every day, 3 times a day, or only before Yom Kippur?
No, every time, 3 times a day.
Oh.
He said that you're supposed to. I don't know if it was the Chavetz Chaim. Chavetz Chaim has a tefillah that he says before Rosh Hashanah or Yom Kippur. I'm not sure if it was him or if it was a different one.
I've never heard of it. Sorry, I've never heard of it. I'll tell you, it's very interesting. The 13 attributes of mercy, which you impoverished Ashkenazim never say, except for fast days and so forth and so on. And then the Sephardi world and the Hasidic world are much richer, and I'm lying. I was just making a joke. We say it every morning, and many say it morning and afternoon. I was under the impression that no one says it at night because night is a time of strict judgment above, and you don't want to accuse yourself. But I found out that I'm wrong. That many Sephardim do say it. So that would be 3 times a day. That would be the 13 attributes of mercy. That I could understand. That I know that some Sephardim do say it 3 times a day. Maybe that's what they're referring to. But other than that, I wouldn't know what it would be. Okay, now you'll notice here in this blessing that it's an example of something with which probably you're familiar. Our Father, our King. It starts with, bring us back, our Father, to your Torah, and bring us close, our King, to your service. That's a very common phrase. In fact, if you look, back, I'm doing Marav now. If you look on, this is Ashkenazi. How did he do it here? Yes, before the whole thing. Yeah. If you look on page 121, you'll see a whole list. It goes in 121 to 123, the whole page. So this is a very, very common phrase, our Father, our King. It's never reversed. You never could have our King, our Father. And the simple reason is because, as I have told some of you, the whole world is created out of loving kindness. Judgment, justice, accountability, earning and failing, all of that is part of a derivative principle of justice, which is derivative from loving kindness. Your Father is the one who treats you with loving kindness, and the King is the one who's responsible for justice. So it's always our Father, our King. And the next blessing will have the same thing. Okay, next on 268, 269. Forgive us, our Father, For we have erred. That's not a bad translation at all. I'll explain that to you because there are different words in Hebrew for transgression. Pardon us, our King, which is also very good. For we have willfully sinned. Yes, the word there is for something you did on purpose. Wasn't an error. For you, pardon and forgive. Blessed are you, Hashem, the gracious one who, now I can't explain this. The Hebrew is forgive, and they translate pardon. I don't know where they're coming from. The verb lisloach means to forgive, as they translated it in the previous line. So I think the correct translation is that who forgives abundantly. So first of all, I want to explain the different types of transgression, and then we'll talk about what we're asking for here. And then I'm going to broaden the context a little bit to put in kapara, which is for Yom Kippur, to have a more complete picture of the possibilities. We ask here for mechila, which they translate as pardon. Slicha is forgiveness. If you are Israeli or if you've lived here for a while, you know what a doch is. A doch is when you committed travel, a vehicular transgression, and they give you a ticket. Doch stands for din v'cheshbon. Din v'cheshbon. That's a classical Hebrew phrase. Din means judgment, and cheshbon means calculation. Well, the Gaon of Vilna says that's appropriate for perhaps all or almost all transgressions. Because when a person performs a transgression, there are two dimensions. There's what he did, which is illegal. That can be a matter of din, a straight judgment. But then there's what he could have and should have been doing with the time and energy and resources with which he committed the transgression. That also he's liable for because he's failed to live up to the responsibility that he has. But that requires a cheshbon, that requires a calculation. What could he have done and what would his value have been? It's like George, who's on the line testing the widgets. His job is to take one widget out of 20, pick it up and give it a bang with a hammer, make sure that it's strong. He's paid to do that from 9 to 5. He's standing there on the line, banging the widgets. Yeah, but at 1:30 in the afternoon, he has an important telephone call to make to Alaska. And he looks around. There's nobody there. He doesn't know they put in secret cameras to watch the workers. He doesn't. So he says, okay, the office is over there. And he sneaks out and he goes and makes a call on the company telephone to Alaska for his private call. And then he goes back in and he goes back to banging the widgets. Well, there's a security camera and the phone is bugged. So his supervisor calls him in and says, George, you made a telephone call to Alaska, a private telephone call. You had no right to do that. It costs so and so much money. We're docking your wages. And furthermore, George, 152 widgets went by without getting banged. What about that? So it's a double transgression. Almost everything we do has a double transgression, two dimensions of transgression. So, if you talk about what we owe for the fact that we should have been doing something positive, or what we owe for the fact that we acted destructively, we used resources that aren't ours, everything that we have control over, we understand as a kind of work material, work means, so that we can do the service of the Kodesh Baruch Hu we're supposed to do. And the Kodesh Baruch Hu can say to us, pay up. You used the energy I gave you, the intelligence, the resources, and everything else, to do that, and not to do this, pay up. And I say, nothing's mine. I have nothing to pay up with. There's nothing I can give you. Please forgive the loan. Cancel the indebtedness. That's mechila. Mechila is a word that comes from Jewish civil law, where if someone owes you money, you can cancel the debt. That's mechila. And we have a debt to Kodesh Baruch Hu by doing something wrong. We ask for that kind of cancellation. That's one. The second is forgiveness, which, as it means in English, please harbor no ill will. Don't keep a grudge against me. Enable me, be willing, let me say it carefully, be willing to accept me in a relationship that isn't reflected in the fact that I did the wrong thing. That's the second. Now, on Yom Kippur, we ask for something else in addition, kapara. What is kapara? Strictly speaking, the word means cleansing. The word is used for a particular case where you clean your hands or something on a metal vessel, and it's called kapara. That means that even after canceling the indebtedness and forgiving me, there's something left over, some remainder of the transgression that's left over, which is causing some kind of loss and has to be expunged. Now, I'm just mentioning that if you have an older version of my recordings, I said it in a different way, which I came to feel was a mistake. I'm going to go back and take you through the mistake. I think the correct explanation is this. I'll give you an example. Let's suppose that George knows that his brakes are loose, but he'll get to it next week. He's just hasn't got time to tighten the brakes. And he's in a residential area. The kid runs out in front of the car. He slams on the brakes, and they slip, and he kills the kid. Well, it's negligent manslaughter, and in his jurisdiction, it's a monetary fine of $3 million, and he's brought to trial. And the parents are there. The parents, of course, are distraught, and they could kill him if they could get their hands on him. And he's guilty. Okay, time goes by. George earns enough money to buy food and pay rent. That's it. He doesn't earn any extra money. After a while, the parents of the child send a message and say, look, we're not going to chase you to the end of your life to try and get the millions of dollars you owe us. Forget it. We're not going after that. That means they're canceling the indebtedness. So more time goes by, and we get a message from the parents. Listen, people live under pressure, and people make foolish decisions, and the mistake, our child did run out in front of the car, and so on and so on. We just want to let you know that we forgive you. We're not holding any grudges against you. We don't hate you. We forgive you. Okay. Next month, George and the parents happen to be at the same social gathering. Could you imagine George walking over to the parents and saying, oh, Mr. and Mrs. Jones, how nice to see you. Let's sit down and have a drink. Let's, talk and catch up on old times. I don't think so. Because even though they've forgiven him, he can't presume on their kindness to enter into the same kind of friendly, relaxed atmosphere and relationship that he had with them before he killed their child. He can't presume on that. He can't bring himself with ease into that relationship. He's suffering the psychological residue of what happened before. So that's kapara. Kapara is you're asking Kadosh Baruch Hu, heal my psychology so that I can reestablish a relationship with you which isn't compromised, handicapped by the fact that I performed the transgression that I did. Those are the three things that we really want from a Kadosh Baruch Hu. One simple reason why we don't ask for it all 3 times a year is because there is a day which God himself called Yom Kippurim, the Day of Atonement. That's the day that he set aside for that to happen. So you can't count on it the rest of the year. We do ask for it in Yom Kippur multiple times, but the rest of the year we don't. That's one thing. Now, there are 3 types of transgressions. What's called chetir, which is the first one, which they translate as to err, is where you didn't intend to do the transgression. Well, let's see. If you didn't intend to do it, how come it happened? Because you weren't aware of the total circumstances. Either you weren't aware that it's forbidden, or you weren't aware of the circumstances that you were in, that it would eventuate in an action which the Torah forbids. So you weren't intending to do a transgression. But now, if it's a total accident, then you don't do tshuva for that. And you don't ask for forgiveness for that. Because if it's a total accident, person steps on your toe, and you say, why did you do that? Boy, if you don't have a good explanation, you're going to pay for it. You said, he pushed me. Well, then you go to him. You don't continue your interaction with the guy who stepped on your toe. He was pushed. You're not responsible for things that were a total accident. So if here we're asking God for forgiveness and pardon, it must be that we are somewhat responsible. And the answer is because this type of transgression is the result of negligence. I didn't know, but I could have known. Now, more important, I didn't know, but I should have known. I had a responsibility to know. The Torah has responsibilities of investigation. In certain circumstances, you have responsibility to investigate to make sure that you don't do something ignorantly. And in other conditions, not. There are cases where a person does something and it breaks the Torah law and the information was available, but he's still not responsible because he had no responsibility to investigate. For example, we have a rule that if one person tells you that something's kosher, you can rely on that. Suppose the person he tells you is the label has come off the jar and it's in the refrigerator, and he's the one who put the jar there, and he said, yeah, it's kosher. The label's actually sitting in the cabinet, but he told me it's kosher. I'm allowed to rely on that. I could have looked at the label. I could have, but I didn't have to. So, but if a person does have a responsibility to check, and he doesn't, and then he transgresses in ignorance, he's liable for that as having been irresponsible in making an investigation. Now, that's not nearly as bad as knowing what you're doing and deciding you're going to do it anyway, obviously, but it is a type of transgression. And I should tell you, just because it's of use in sometimes, almost all the sacrifices, the vast majority of sacrifices are only for this type of transgression. If a person performs a transgression deliberately, there may be 3 or 4 examples, 3 or 4 out of 1,700, where you can bring a sacrifice for it. But the other ones, sacrifice isn't enough. You don't get off so easily as just presenting a sacrifice in the temple. Even with tshuva, it's not enough. More than that has to be done. So but it is a type of transgression for which one has to do tshuva and one has to ask for forgiveness. Yeah.
Does it fall on the other person if the other person said that it's kosher and really he didn't check himself enough?
Well, whatever mistake he made, and in his case, it might be a pure accident. In other words, it all depends. It all depends on whether he had a responsibility to check further.
Does the responsibility though itself fall to that other person?
I mean, it depends. It depends. Maybe the label is there, and the label that has something in German because it's a German product, and he doesn't read German. So, only for Sfardim, not for Ashkenazim or something like that, which you do have. Like on Pesach, they can eat certain types of beans and things that we can't eat. So, and he couldn't read that. He didn't realize it was relevant. Okay, so that's the three types of response. So first type of transgression is that. Second is avon. Avon is something where you know very well what you're doing and you decide to do it, which happens. The third is called pesha, and pesha is rebellion. I'll give you an expression of this from a famous non-Jew, Albert Camus, who was a noted French philosopher of the mid-century. He said, "If there is a God, I spit in his face." Why did he say that? Because the French lost the Second World War in a very ignominious fashion, and it crashed all their pretense of being superior in intelligence and in lifestyle than to the rest of the world. And the conclusion that they drew was, nothing's meaningful, nothing has any value, there are no real norms, everything's just random. That was the conclusion they drew, another grandiose conclusion. And God is a norm, so he has to rebel against that. Okay, so that is, now if that sounds, how shall I say, if that sounds so extreme that it will almost never happen, let me tell you a Tosfos. We have two types, I shouldn't say it that way. Mitzvahs can be divided into two categories. They can be divided into 142 categories and different types of categories and so on and so on. This is one of the many divisions. Some commandments are obligatory. God says, I command you to do it. If you do it, you'll be rewarded. If you don't do it, you'll be punished. Some commandments are optional. They're invitations. If you do it, you'll be rewarded, but if you don't, no loss. And the question is, which is more important, more significant, more valuable? And contrary to what one normally thinks, the obligatory ones are more important, more valuable, and the voluntary ones are less important and valuable. That's a long story, and I'm not going to go through the whole thing right now. Why is it that the obligatory ones are more valuable? Because, as says Tosfos, when you are ordered to do something, there's natural resistance. Don't tell me what to do. Don't push me around. I'll live my own life. I'll make my own decisions. And that natural, it sounds very modern, right? Also sounds very American. This is from 800 years ago. That natural resistance, I want to be my own boss, means that it's harder to perform an obligatory commandment than a voluntary one. And because you have to work harder to do it, therefore you get more credit for it, you get more reward for it. So the idea of Pesha is not far-fetched. There's a verse in Proverbs, Mayim gnuvim yimtaku, stolen waters are sweet. For certain people, or at certain times, the very fact that it's forbidden makes it precious. Again, speaking to Americans, you know very well, you don't ever call yourself a mature adult unless you have at least once violated every type of authority. You have disobeyed your parents and disobeyed your teachers, and you have to speed on the highway and steal something from a store. If you haven't thumbed your nose at every different category of authority, you're just a toady, you're just a robot, you're not really your own man. Is that childish? Yeah, it's childish. But then there's a little bit of the child in all of us. So that element is still there. So Pesha is not extravagantly exaggerated. Now, those are the three types of transgressions, although here you only have two mentioned, and Yom Kippur you have all three mentioned. And now, having said all of that, I want to show you one very precious line in the Siddur. Take a look on page 155. Very top of page 155. And this is a verse. A redeemer shall come to Zion, and to those of Jacob who repent from, now they say willful sin, but if you look in the Hebrew, it's Pesha. Rabbi Chon of Asman points out, this is a very astounding verse. Who will the Redeemer come to? He'll come to those of the Jews who repent Pesha. They're repenting the worst possible type of sin. And that's all it's mentioned. Which would mean that if they repent of the worst possible type of sin, that's enough to justify the coming of the Redeemer. That's really an astounding statement. I would have thought to justify the coming of the Redeemer, you have to repent from all the sins, or certainly all different types of sins, the vast majority of sins. This is a very extreme statement. Repenting of Pesha is the worst possible crime. Therefore, it's the one that you're most invested in to repent from, because it's really terrible. And that's what the verse says. So, it's something to know about the status of, yeah.
How do you translate Pesha again?
Rebellion. Although, like many Hebrew words, the words are elastic and they have different applications. Maybe this will bridge with what I said at the beginning. When the holidays come around, one of the things that you need to do is to make Erev Tavshilin. If there's a holiday on Friday. Well, let's see. Our holidays, you're allowed to cook. Okay, but you can't cook for another day. You're focusing on the day of the holiday. But if the holiday's on Friday, what's going to be with food for Shabbos? Especially if you have 2 days of a holiday, Thursday, Friday, and Shabbos. Very difficult to prepare food for Shabbos. So for Wednesday, they didn't have refrigerators, So you can cook on Friday for Shabbos, or Thursday and Friday for Shabbos, if you make a certain arrangement. There's a way to do this, certain arrangement called Erev Tavshilin. Now, when you do it, if you look at the formula, you say, I'm doing this to enable myself and all the people in this city to cook on the holiday for the Shabbos. How do you do that? Well, it can be done. One person can do it for another. Especially the rabbi of the city can do it for everyone. So, the halacha is, suppose you forgot. It's Friday morning. We have to cook for Shabbos. And I forgot to make Erev Tavshilin. It's okay. You can rely on the rabbi of the city that he made Erev Tavshilin for everybody. Says the Chafetz Chaim, I'm sure he has a source for this, I don't remember the source. I read it in the Chafetz Chaim. Says the Chafetz Chaim, you can rely on the rabbi once. Once. But if it happens a second time, he says then you're a posheya and you can't rely on the rabbi and you can't cook. Gee, I forgot once. Okay, I forgot once. 3 years later, I forgot again. Oh, now you're a rebel. You're mired in horrible sin, but I forgot. Okay, so it's not as if, you're imitating Camus and rebelling consciously against God. But you failed at this, right? You didn't take measures to make sure that you won't fail at it again? That's called a posheya. So that's not exactly the same sense of posheya that we saw before, but it highlights the seriousness of not taking the responsibility seriously by taking precautions not to repeat it. My Rabbi Zatzal pointed out, when it says here about tshuva, bring us back, return us, there's an extra kind of footnote at that. Let's see, you want to go back to where you were before you committed the transgression? Remember, that's where you fell from. So you really want to go back there? Maybe when you go back, you should have some adjustments, to try to safeguard that you shouldn't fall again from the same place. Okay, at any rate, that's the idea here of the 3 different types of transgression and 3 different types of response that we want from Kodesh Baruch Hu. And the final closing, it says, as I told you, I think the translation should be forgives abundantly. Marbe. Marbe in Hebrew is a very general term. It means to increase. In English, you have, and it's reflected in Hebrew grammar also, you have 2 different types of nouns. What's called, I think, count nouns and mass nouns. Take shoes. Shoes is a count noun. You could say, I have 16 shoes. Then there's footwear. Footwear is another word for shoes. But you don't have 16 footwear or 16 footwears. Footwear refers to a certain section of the world that has a relationship to the feet. Snow. There's no 1 snow or 5 snow or 16 snow. Milk. No 1 milk, or 2 milk, or 3 milk, or 5 milk. That's why, in order to make it into a count noun, we add in units. You can have 6 pounds of snow. You can have 14 ounces of milk, but the 6 is the pounds, and the 14 is the ounces, whereas the milk and the snow by themselves don't get a number. So you have count nouns and mass nouns. Marbeh abundantly applies to both. It can mean a lot of units in a count noun, or it can mean a lot of mass in a mass noun. It just means lots. Now, God forgives abundantly. What does that mean exactly? He forgives abundantly. So there are many explanations to this. There's a verse in Proverbs which says, "Shevi yipol tzadik v'kam," the righteous man falls 7 times and gets up. Now that verse deserves a little meditation. If he falls 7 times, why is he righteous? Well, what did you think? Righteous means without ever falling? Without ever performing transgression? No, that's not what righteous means. That's not what it means. He can fall 7 times, but if he gets up afterwards, he can be called righteous. In particular, he can be called righteous because if he does tshuva, he loses all responsibility for the previous transgressions. So now, let's think about this verse in Proverbs. 7 times, he falls 7 times and he gets up. There are those who say, this is even if the 7 times he fell for the same transgression. He repeated the same transgression 7 times. And God forgives him 7 times. That's abundant forgiveness. The repetition doesn't mean the person's condemned or abandoned. No. As long as after the 7th time he also gets up and doesn't give up, doesn't simply relinquish responsibility, relinquish effort to improve. So that's a very, very important element here. But forgives abundantly. That's, see, in the closing here you have something here which isn't in the rest of the paragraph, so it's really important. Yeah.
I've heard that verse before. Does it mean particularly 7 times, or does it mean as long as he gets up?
Oh, it doesn't mean 7 as opposed to 8. No. The number 7, there are a lot of numbers that we have which are really symbolic. 7 means lots and lots. And 7 is, for our environment in the world, our world is built on 7. There are 7 days in which it was produced, including Shabbos. Right? And there are lots of 7s that repeat over and over again. 7 is characteristic of our world. 8, 9, and 10 are something beyond our world, which pokes into our world from time to time. So it just means, lots and lots. It could be 17, or it could be 103, it could be 94. That's not limited in any way. Okay? All right, we have another 5 minutes. Let's start the next one. This one's very relevant to us. Look upon our suffering. Well, we'll see if it's suffering or not. Take up our battle. We are in the midst of battles. Redeem us speedily for your name's sake. And he's called Goel Yisrael, the Redeemer of Israel. I remarked before about the capital R, which I don't think is correct. I don't think it's justified. Now, here we say for your name's sake. If you look back at the first blessing, on page 267, it's the same thing. He brings a redeemer to their children's children for his name's sake. Somehow, Hashem's name is invested in this idea of redemption. Now let's explain for a moment what redemption means. Redemption on the one hand and salvation on the other hand aren't synonymous. The R-E in redemption is crucial to its meaning. And I'll give you an example. If you go to a hall for a performance, and it's winter time, sometimes they have a coat room, and you give your coat to the person there, and they give you a ticket. When you go back to the coat room, when you give in your ticket, you're redeeming your coat. Or a pawn shop. A pawn shop, they give you money for the item, and if somebody buys it before you come back, then you've lost it, and if otherwise, you can get it back. When you give money, you get it back. That's redeem. It comes back to where it was. Salvation doesn't have that implication. A person's in trouble, he's saved from it, he may end up in a situation that he was never in before. I just read about a beautiful thing that happened October 7th, that a woman was supposed to have an interview for a job. Oh no, this happened in Amsterdam. Sorry, it happened in Amsterdam. She had an interview for a job, and then the meetings took place on that Thursday night. And Friday there were people who were still injured and people who needed help. And she got in her car and she was going around taking people, she took people in, and so on. And the people who were supposed to interview called her up and said, "You're supposed to be here for an interview." She said, "I know, but my brothers and sisters are suffering and they need immediate help, and I can't make it." Okay, people make sacrifices. She got a call later that day. "You're hired." Without the interview. Someone who cares that much about other people, I want that person working for me. So here it's a question of, and she's in a brand new place now, not a place where she was before. Redeem means to go back to a place where you were before. So when you ask for redemption, you have to have in your mind, where was I before? Where am I now? And what would it mean to go back to that situation? And here we're talking specifically about attack, because it says, fight our battle. Onyenu, the first word, they translate as suffering. It is a common translation. I think I see a different nuance in the word. I think onyenu means deprivation. You don't have the normal circumstances that you usually have. Yom Kippur, the mitzvah is a mitzvah of inui, same word. It's a mitzvah of deprivation. You don't eat, you don't drink, you don't wash, you don't use oil, and you don't anoint yourself with oil or massage yourself with oil, don't have sexual relations, don't wear shoes. Nobody says you have to be suffering. Nobody says to sleep on pins or to turn off the air conditioner. Nobody says that. You're deprived. You might be suffering, you might not be suffering. So to translate the word as suffering, I think, is exaggeration. But when you are deprived, there are things you can't do. So this means you have to think back to a situation where we weren't deprived and where we weren't in a position of being attacked, and then ask God to bring us back to that position. Now that means you have to be a little selective. Think in the past to a condition that you could feel justified in saying to Kodesh Baruch Hu, here's where I am, here are the things that are difficult for me in this situation, bring me back to there. Jones Beach in July with hot dogs and the merry-go-round. Is that where you're going to go back to? I think it's going to be hard to justify that. So you have to think carefully about where you want to go back to. Okay, we'll pick it up tomorrow in the session.